How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that honored you as a woman, as made equal in the image of God. Welcome to Heretica, her eco-feminist theology podcast. My name is Elena and I am an eco-feminist theologian. Please subscribe at theologyofher.substack.com. Thank you for joining me in this new podcast episode. Why are nuns being raped? Reversing the biblical narrative of rape. Before I begin, a trigger warning. I will be mentioning rape and other strong themes around sexual abuse, so please don't listen if you feel you may be triggered. Everything I share, please don't take it personally and just note it as a philosophical discussion and viewpoints. Always support yourself through professional and personal self-care. If you have experienced any form of sexual abuse, know it was not your fault. You are not the abuse. You are created equal in the image of God. You are whole, complete, and content. So starting with what has been going on for Catholic nuns around the world. There have been few reports in the media sharing about the sexual violence towards nuns in and outside the Vatican. According to articles published in The Guardian, nuns have been raped for years. For this part of the podcast, I researched many media articles. I thought a good place to begin is the history of nuns. According to the Christian Faith Guide, Christian women during the early church in the 3rd century joined the men who went to the desert in Egypt and Syria to become monks, as they were persecuted for their faith. Women who were not interested in marriage or raising kids joined the monks in the desert and set up their own religious convents as nuns. The word nun was inspired by the Latin word nonna. Nonna translates to aunt or sister in English. The first orders adopted the name nun because it speaks to the sisterhood and bond among the women in monastic communities. Nuns are women who are united in their quest to be fully committed to seeking God without distractions. When Christianity was young, religious women were referred to as consecrated virgins. Long before that, nuns were known as the brides of Christ. In recent years, Christians adopted the word sister. Many people use the word sister and nun interchangeably. Today, the word sister indicates a spiritual sisterhood among the women living in monastic communities. These nuns dedicated their lives to following Jesus' teachings. To show their commitment, they wore veils and referred to themselves as the brides of Christ. Some of the women took vows of chastity to pursue their dreams in areas like leadership. During this time, married women with children were excluded from many social and political activities. In cultures where women pay dowry, parents of young nuns would send a portion of the dowry to the convents. This was one of the ways the Brides of Christ funded these institutions. The founding members of convents decided to take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. The Brides of Christ partnered with monks so they could position their convents next to monasteries for protection. Many women joined these convents to escape the restrictions and duties of marriage. However, not all of them practiced chastity. Some conceived, thanks to the proximity of monasteries. That said, many of the nuns remained virgins, and those who were widowed refused to remarry. In the Catholic Church, the order of nuns began in the 6th century. According to historical records, Saint Scholastica formed the first order of Catholic nuns in the 6th century. Saint Scholastica was the twin sister of a Christian monk, Saint Benedict of Nursia. Saint Scholastica was the twin sister of a Christian monk named Saint Benedict of Nursia. Saint Benedict of Nursia set the tone for his sister by establishing the Benedictine order of monks. Saint Scholastica visited her brother's monastery many times to pray with him and talk about spiritual mysteries. It was during these moments that she saw the need to create such an environment for women. Saint Scholastica initiated the construction of the first nunnery near Saint Benedict's monastery. Saint Scholastica was the first recognized nun to openly choose the lifestyle and endorse it. This lady was fully committed to a secluded life of servitude and prayer. Being the kind of Saint Benedict meant that Saint Scholastica's life was documented and used as an example of exemplary nun life. It is worth noting that though many think of her as the first nun, monasticism started way before Saint Scholastica's time. Scholars suggest that there could have been other women in history who adopted the monastic lifestyle before Saint Scholastica. However, her role is to achieve gender equality by making it possible for women to dedicate their lives to God. Saint Scholastica understood that not all women are enthusiastic about marriage or having kids. The monastic houses established by Saint Benedict and Saint Scholastica played a key role in conserving religious knowledge. Saint Benedict was credited for writing the first set of rules for monastic living. In his manuscripts, the Italian monk stipulated lifestyle guidelines founded on prayer and work within these secluded communities. Owing to the popularity of the Benedictine tradition, many orders of nuns started coming up. Although most of them used the Benedictine manuscripts as a guiding tool, each had a unique purpose in their religious duties. For example, the Carmelites order began in the 12th century. This order was focused on a life of total solitude, meditation, and prayer. In the 13th century, St. Francis founded the Franciscans. This religious order was motivated to lead a life of simplicity, free of material possessions. By this time, nuns had started living in sealed-off communities known as cloisters. These pious women dedicated their time and energy to service, contemplation, and prayer. Things became hard for nuns in 1298. During this year, the Pope issued a decree demanding that all nuns should avoid the secular world and remain within the confines of the convents. The Pope suggested that the nuns would have a hard time not tempting men. This rule affected the convents that had active charity and outreach ministries. Fortunately, the Vatican II reforms brought an era of change for orders of nuns worldwide. In the 1960s, the Vatican finally encouraged nuns to participate in ministry beyond their cloisters. Establishment of the magazine that revealed the sexual behaviors. The magazine Woman Church World launched in 2012 as a monthly glossy published alongside the Vatican newspaper L'Osservatore Romano. The editor was Lucetta Scarafia, and it was run by an all-female editorial team who oversaw its growth into a standalone Vatican magazine as a voice for women and about issues of interest to the entire Catholic Church, and was published in Italian, French, Spanish, and English. The Pontifical Council for the Laity announced about the magazine upon its first issue, launched on May 31, 2012. For the first time in its more than 100-year-old history, beginning today, the daily edition of L'Osservatore Romano will publish an insert on women on the last Thursday of every month. It will consist of 4 color pages, conceived of and edited with enthusiasm and determination by several female colleagues, in order to extend the outlook of the Holy See's newspaper to Woman Church World. This is in fact the title of the new initiative, open to a fundamental reality to the Christian tradition. The insert intends to spread in ever-broadening circles with an international outreach to and even beyond the visible boundaries of global Catholicism. So what was the women's section about? The Pontifical Council for the Laity, through its women's section, is attentive to all that pertains to women in the world. The section strives to advance ideas and activities that can contribute to the dignity and vocation of women in the Church and in society. Together with an ad hoc group of experts, the women's section is involved in a study on the man-woman relationship under the headings of specific identity, reciprocal interaction, and mutual complementarity. Women Church World had enjoyed editorial independence from L'Osservatore even while being published under its auspices. But how did the controversies all start? It began in 2018 when Lucetta Scarafia ran an article entitled "The Almost Free Work of Sisters." The article denounced how nuns are often treated like servants by cardinals and bishops, for whom they cook and clean for next to no pay. Mainstream outlets republished the article, stating, "An exposé in a Vatican magazine revealed the plight of many nuns, exploited as cheap labor, and denounced the practice by the Catholic Church. Some of them serve in the homes of bishops or cardinals. Others work in the kitchens of church institutions or teach," the article reads, according to the Associated Press. Some of them, serving the men of the church, get up in the morning to make breakfast and go to sleep after dinner is served, the house cleaned, and the laundry washed and ironed. The article relied on the accounts of anonymous nuns who described working essentially as unpaid or underpaid servants to the men of the church. Catholic nuns are part of different religious orders and typically take vows in service of religion that often include poverty and celibacy. In the eyes of Jesus, we are all children of God, but in their concrete life, some nuns do not live this, and they experience great confusion and discomfort, said one nun described as Sister Marie. Sister Marie lamented that nuns are rarely invited to sit at the table they serve. The article, "The Nearly Free Work of Sisters," describes how in addition to often having to serve male members of the church, women's work is undervalued in general. Lucetta Scarafia has long been an opponent of what she called misogyny in the church. Until now, no one has had the courage to denounce these things, Scarafia told the Associated Press. "We try to give a voice to those who don't have the courage to say these words." Sister Marie noted that many nuns from Africa, Asia, or Latin America who come to study in Rome hail from poor families, whose extended care is often paid for by their congregations. As a result, they feel they can't complain about their work conditions, she said. This all creates in them a strong interior rebellion, Sister Marie reported. These sisters feel indebted, tied down, and so they keep quiet. Scarafia said she wanted to give these sisters a voice, even though she counts herself among the church's exploited. Neither Scarafia nor the 8-member editorial staff of Women Church World is paid. The magazine, funded by a grant from the Italian Postal Service, pays contributors for their articles, but it is published each month thanks to the free labor of its editorial staff. Pope Francis, who is seen as one of the Church's most progressive leaders, has spoken out about the plight of women. In a 2016 address, he said nuns should be working in service to the Church, not servitude. Let these sisters go to schools, into the neighborhoods, with the sick, with the poor. This is the criterion, a work that involves service and not servitude, said the Pope. Following this story, more nuns started to come forward and share their experience of sexual abuse. The magazine on February 1st, 2019, published the article, which was once again picked up by mainstream outlets, entitled "Vatican Woman's Magazine Condemns Sexual Abuse of Nuns by Priests." The sexual abuse of nuns by priests and the resulting scandal of religious sisters having abortions or giving birth to children not recognized by their fathers has been condemned in an article in the Vatican's Woman's Magazine. The February issue of Woman Church World, distributed alongside the Vatican newspaper, says that religious sisters for years have not reported offenses against them by priests for fear of retaliation. The editor stated that this is a perverse use of touch. The article explains that Pope Francis' understanding of abuse can be of some help in understanding how abuse against religious sisters comes about. If you point to power, to clericalism, the abuse against religious sisters takes on another aspect and can finally be recognized for what it is. That is an act of power in which touch becomes a violation of one's personal intimacy, it says. The article further says that reports of priests sexually abusing nuns in Africa were filed to the Vatican in the 1990s, yet nothing changed. Now, as part of the Me Too movement, and as the sexual abuse of minors comes to the fore, women are beginning to publicly denounce their abuse. If the Church continues to close its eyes to the scandal, made even worse by the fact that abuse of women brings about procreation, and it is therefore at the origin of forced abortions and children who aren't recognized by priests, the condition of oppression of women in the Church will never change, Scarafia wrote. In November of last year, the Catholic Church's Global Organization of Nuns denounced the culture of silence and secrecy surrounding sexual abuse in the Church in a statement. The International Union of Superiors General, which represents more than 500,000 women religious worldwide, did not name priests as the aggressors, more broadly condemned what is called the pattern of abuse that is prevalent within the Church and society today. The International Union of Superiors General, which represents more than 500,000 religious women worldwide, did not name priests as the aggressors, but more broadly condemned what is called the pattern of abuse that is prevalent within the Church and society today, citing sexual, verbal, and emotional abuse as types of mistreatment that festers in unequal power relations and demeans the dignity of its victims. We condemn those who support the culture of silence and secrecy, often under the guise of protection of an institution's reputation or naming it part of one's culture, the group said. In September 2018, women religious in India made global headlines when they staged a public protest, marching to the High Court in Kerala to demand the arrest of a bishop alleged to have raped a nun 13 times over 2 years. The nun first reported the alleged rape to the Church a year earlier, only to receive no response. When she filed a complaint to the police in June 2018, the police did not take action for 70 days, causing the nuns to stage the protest, the first by religious sisters in the country. It seems police are reluctant to take action due to pressure. Church and police both let us down, one of the religious sisters protesting told news outlets. Following this expose, a few weeks later, Lucetta Scarafia and her team quit the magazine. This is what she told The Guardian. On March 26, Lucetta Scarafia sent a letter to Pope Francis. She was at the time the editor of the Vatican's glossy women's magazine, Woman Church World, a title that in its 7 years had taken aim at misogyny in the Church, exposed the shocking sexual abuse of nuns and the secret abortions priests had paid for to get rid of the evidence. We are throwing in the towel, she told the Pope, because we feel surrounded by an atmosphere of distrust and progressive delegitimization. The we was the 11-strong editorial team, all but 2 of whom quit on the same day, accusing the church elders of attempting to gag them. A vital initiative has been reduced to silence, and there has been a return to the antiquated and arid custom of choosing women considered trustworthy from on high under the direct control of men. The Guardian journalist says, I meet Scarafia 70 in her home in the plush Parioli district of Rome. She is softly spoken, but strong-willed, maintaining that it was the right thing to do to leave the magazine. We were free before. We got on with our work without any pressure, but in the end, they left no space for autonomy, she told the journalist. The article created so much embarrassment and hostility in the Catholic hierarchy as the priests thought it was their right to have an unpaid nun serving them. They believe that women become nuns to serve them. It's a mistaken belief, but is very much rooted within the Church, she said. Women become nuns because they have a vocation and want to help those who are suffering or fragile, not to serve priests. On the topic of abuse, the Guardian article stated, it is rare for nuns to speak publicly about alleged abuse by priests, an issue that has blighted the Catholic Church for decades. There is also scant care for abused nuns, many of whom have been thrown out of their orders and made homeless. Some have claimed to have become pregnant by priests and then forced to have abortions. Pope Francis has been accused of opposing reforms that would seriously address the problem of clerical sexual abuse of children and vulnerable adults, while turning a blind eye to priests who assault nuns and force them to have abortions. Francis promised to spare no effort to bring to justice pedophile priests and the bishops who covered up their crimes at an unprecedented summit in February 2019. An event that was supposed to mark a turning point in the handling of a scandal that has embroiled the Catholic Church for decades. A week before the summit, Francis became the first pontiff to publicly admit that priests had also sexually abused nuns, some of whom shared testimony during the event, and pledged to do more to fight the problem. 3 months later, the Vatican established procedures for every diocese to report allegations of abuse and foster accountability for the actions of bishops and cardinals. Francis also abolished the rule of pontifical secrecy, a kind of code of confidentiality, in an effort to improve transparency in sexual abuse cases. 5 years on, activists for the survivors of clerical sexual abuse say Francis has failed to fulfill his promise, and the new rules had made little impact. Co-founder of Bishop Accountability, Anne Barrett Doyle, which tracks alleged clergy sexual abuse claims, cited 10 cases since 2019 that allegedly show the Pope favored accused bishops and clerics over their victims. It would be one thing if we were coming here to talk about an overall good record with an occasional inconsistency, but we're not. We're talking about a continued pattern of the Pope backing accused abusers, Doyle told reporters in Rome. It's not that this Pope doesn't have his heart in reform, or is maybe being blocked by other members of the Curia. I believe he is opposed to reform. His measures have been designed to produce little impact. Meanwhile, the Vatican had been aware of the abuse of nuns by priests for decades before the public acknowledgement by Francis, but nothing has come of his commitment to fight the issue, added Doris Resinger, an activist and survivor of clerical sexual abuse, who authored a research paper on the girls and women impregnated by priests and the subsequent forced abortions. While the Pope publicly condemns abortion, comparing it to hiring a hitman, he turns a blind eye to the priests who force nuns into having abortions, said Resinger. Resinger said that while some nuns had come forward about abuse since 2019, they were mostly too afraid to speak out. There is scant care for abused nuns, many of whom have been thrown out of their orders and made homeless, and under canon law they have no status at all, she said. The Vatican was approached for comment, but no comment was made. Recently, a meeting at the Vatican Embassy in Brussels between the Pope and 17 survivors, child survivors of clerical abuse that lasted 2 hours longer than originally expected, took place. The Vatican said Pope Francis had expressed his shame for their suffering. The ability to have such an opportunity cannot be underestimated, but survivor groups have long wanted such meetings to lead to far better systems being in place, not just to punish those who abuse, but stop the abuse happening in the first place. My personal insight is that each government should hold inquiries into church-related abuse in their respective countries, and then hold the Pope and Archbishop of each country accountable for change. And with relevant public outcry, many things can change. We need in some way to force this to happen, instead of waiting for the Catholic Church to hold clergy accountable on its own accord. The reason why we don't see change may be due to a decades-long culture of silence around such behaviors, and there is so much the Pope can do. When you're up against the system, it can be hard to change webs of interconnected parts, or perhaps the Pope isn't able to change things even if he wanted to, for whatever reasons. So now let's try and explore why rape myths exist in the Bible, why they were inserted, and how we can ignore or reinterpret them. So how did rape begin? So there's the presupposition of belief that women's oppression is ultimately based in physical strength and power that men have over women. So in her comprehensive and important analysis of rape, Susan Brown Miller says that when men discovered that they could rape, they proceeded to do it, and that from prehistoric time to the present, rape has played a critical function. Brown Miller's attribution of violence to males and victimization to females strums a common theme in Western social commentary on the nature of human nature. Most of the popularizers of this theme present what amounts to a social biological view of human behavior, which traces war, violence, and now rape to the violent landscape of our primitive ancestors, where early on, the male tendency in these directions became genetically programmed in the fight for survival of the fittest. Susan Brown Miller's contention is that rape is the means by which men keep women in a state of fear. So in rape-prone societies, we have sexual submission of women to men, control, power over. It's a sign of men's malehood. In certain cultures, it's used to punish women for being unfaithful, ownership. In some indigenous cultures, it's considered a rite of passage of boys towards girls. Fights over women as the primary causes of war. And groups raid each other for wives in an area where marriageable women are in short supply due to the practice of female infanticide. The etiology, that's the reasons why men express this violent sexual behavior towards women, is the assumption that male sexual repression will inevitably erupt in the form of sexual violence. The implicit assumption here is that males who are denied sexual access to women will obtain access by force unless men are separated from women. Such an assumption depicts men as creatures who cannot control their sexual impulses, and women as the unfortunate victims. In societies where males are trained to be dominant and interpersonal relations are marked by outbreaks of violence, one can predict that females may become the victims in the playing out of the male ideology of power and control. In areas where it's low socioeconomic classes, the prime value then becomes the use of physical aggression as a demonstration of masculinity and toughness. Reflecting on this, Brown-Miller states, like assault, rape is an act of physical damage to another person. And like robbery, it is also an act of acquiring property. The intent is to have the female body in the acquisitory meaning of the term. A woman is perceived by the rapist both as hated person and desired property. Hostility against her and possession of her may be simultaneous motivations, and the hatred for her is expressed in the same act that is the attempt to take her against her will. In one violent crime, rape is an act against person and property. It is important to understand that violence is socially and not biologically programmed. Rape is not an integral part of male nature, but the means by which men programmed for violence express their sexual selves. So bringing religious etiology into the discussion. The reason is to keep women from giving vows of chastity to a virgin goddess for purposes of self-realization and also to desacralize women's menstrual cycles. To understand this better, I will highlight what the research states about the characteristics of rape-free societies. In rape-free societies, women are treated with considerable respect and prestige is attached to female reproductive and productive roles. Interpersonal violence is minimized, and a people's attitude regarding the natural environment is one of reverence rather than one of exploitation. An example is the Mimbuti pygmies of the Ilturi forest in Africa, which provides a prototypical profile of a rape-free society. Violence between the sexes or between anybody is virtually absent among the net hunting Mimbuti pygmies when they are in their forest environment. Their attitude towards the forest is reflective of their attitude towards each other. The forest is addressed as father, mother, lover, and friend. The Mimbuti say that forest is everything, a provider of food, shelter, warmth, clothing, and affection. Each person and animal is endowed with some spiritual power which derives from a single source whose physical manifestation is the forest itself. The ease of the Mimbuti relationship to their environment is reflected in the relationship between the sexes. There is little division of labor by sex. The hunt is frequently a joint effort. A man is not ashamed to pick mushrooms and nuts if he finds them, or to wash and clean a baby. In general, leadership is minimal, and there is no attempt to control or to dominate either the geographical or human environment. Decision-making is by common consent. Men and women have equal say because hunting and gathering are both important to the economy. The forest is the only recognized authority of last resort. In decision-making, diversity of opinion may be expressed, but prolonged disagreement is considered to be noise and offensive to the forest. If husband and wife disagree, the whole camp may act to mute their antagonism. The one outstanding feature of such societies is the ceremonial importance of women and the respect accorded the contribution women make to social continuity. a respect which places men and women in relatively balanced power spheres. This respect is clearly present among the Mimbuti and in more complex, rape-free societies. In the West African kingdom of Ashanti, for example, it is believed that only women can contribute to future generations. Ashanti women say, "I am the mother of the man. I alone can transmit the blood to a king. If my sex dies in the clan, then that very clan becomes extinct. For be there one or 1,000 male members left, not one can transmit the blood. And the life of the clan becomes measured on this earth by the span of man's life." So the importance of the feminine attributes of growth and reproduction are found in Ashanti religion and ritual. Priestesses participate with priests in all major rituals. The Ashanti creation story emphasizes the complementarity and inseparability of male and female. The main female deity, the earth goddess, is believed to be the receptacle of past and future generations, as well as the source of food and water. The sacred linkage of earth female blood makes the act of rape incongruous in Ashanti culture. Only one incident of rape was ever reported by an ethnographer of the Ashanti. In this case, the man involved was condemned to death. In some, rape-free societies are characterized by sexual equality and the notion that the sexes are complementary. Though the sexes may not perform the same duties or have the same rights or privileges, each is indispensable to the activities of the other. The key to understanding the relative absence of rape in rape-free as opposed to rape-prone societies is the importance, which in some cases is sacred, attached to the contribution women make to social continuity. Men who are conditioned to respect the female virtues of growth and the sacredness of life do not violate women. It is significant that in societies where nature is held sacred, rape occurs only rarely. The incidence of rape in our society will be reduced to the extent that boys grow to respect women. And the qualities so often associated with femaleness in other societies, namely nurturance, growth, and nature. Women can contribute to the socialization of boys by making these respected qualities in their struggle for equal rights. So we can see that these societies are reminiscent of what is known as matriarchal cultures, which are egalitarian in mentality, and nature was revered. So returning now to the religious aspects of rape, I will share the myth of Britomartis, also known as Diktyna. She was considered to be a Cretan goddess. Her name is usually derived from Britus, sweet or blessing, and Martis, a maiden. So the name means the sweet or blessing maiden. According to tradition, Britomartis was fond of solitude and had vowed to live in perpetual maidenhood. Her journey begins in Phoenicia. From there, she goes to Argos, where she receives divine honors from the inhabitants under the name Lafria. Then she makes her way to Cephalina and then finally to Crete. There she is pursued by King Minos for a full 9 months, where he chases her along the length of Crete. Diktyna flees to the sea coast, where she jumps into the sea to escape him. She is then rescued by fishermen in their nets and afterwards called Diktyna, because in Greek the word dikty means nets. so she receives the name Diktyna. A sailor, Andromedes, carried her from Crete to Aegina, and when on landing there he made an attempt upon her chastity, she fled from his vessel into a grove and disappeared in the sanctuary of Artemis. So after the introduction of worship of Artemis into Crete, Britomartis, between whom her and Artemis there were several points of resemblance, she was placed in the same relation to Artemis. There she was worshipped under Artemis, and in the end the two divinities became completely identified. Britomartis is known as Arcadian Artemis. So this is a foundation myth that shows how when a woman receives a divine initiation and makes a resolve to abstain from sexual relations, and does so with deep connection to a virgin goddess, it is so strong within her that she will do everything possible to remove herself from the pursuit of men. She does so knowingly that this will lead her to her immortality. It is this no from women, this resistance from women, that men began to dislike, and resulted in raping women from a spiritual perspective. So the way sacredness of menstruation was lost is that this interconnection with the virgin goddess for purposes of self-realization was enacted during rites of passage that girls began early in life in ancient Greece. So from age 7 until the time they had their first bleed, menarche, women's rituals in ancient Greece had a fertility basis. Thus, it was women's reproductive or creative energy that, when spiritualized, allowed women to experience rebirth, and like the Diktyna, become completely identified with the divinity. So it was during these rites of passage that young girls would decide that they would take vows of chastity, for example. So they would dedicate their lives to a goddess for purposes of self-realization. As such, vows of chastity began to pose an issue for men's sexual needs and desires. So they aligned menstruation as a woman's disease. Women were being deemed polluted during menses, and menstruation became connected with biological birth. And this led to the abolition of female priesthoods in Greece and, of course, rites of passage. And so we can see how in modern society we don't celebrate rites of passage anymore, and this is one of the reasons. It's because rites of passage really do spiritualize women's reproductive energy, our menstrual cycles, and it gives us a different understanding of how and when we want to use our reproductive energy. Consequently, rape and sexual politics in the biblical narrative also became the way to ensure women's objectification as existing to satisfy the desires of men, even if this meant by force, obscuring the spiritual potential of our reproductive cycles, and most of all the role that vows have on a woman to understand and attain the divine. If we think that nuns take vows of chastity, and that is not respected by the male clergy, then it's not completely invalid to have this trail of thought. That men think women exist to serve them as the only or most important image of God, and that their place in the divine order is less important, or as the reason for sin in this world, women deserve to be violated. Similarly, with the non-existence of rites of passage in women's lives, we can again draw a conclusion of how much women's spiritual progress in this world has been compromised when we draw a comparison with the cultures where they did exist, and how that aligned them with the divine feminine voice and wisdom. As a final conclusion, I will share insight from the book The Absence of God in Biblical Rape Narratives, which is critical of rape narratives and shows their use as metaphors for breaking Abraham's covenant. The author states, a recurring theme in each rape scene involves the issue of correct relationships with the Israelite community, leading to correct marriages and correct sexual relationships with regards as to who inherits the covenant. This means that each rape narrative represents a time when the covenant was broken, or when people fail to keep God's rules. Through this perceived failure, social unrest occurs, which leads to state-sanctioned rape, as with the 600 women from Judges 21, Tamar's rape as a metaphor for David's rape of Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 12-13, the rape of Dinah in Genesis 34, as criticism against Jacob for breaking racial lines when settling in a foreign land. Each rape narrative shows how the resulting failure of men, or the patriarchal structure, happens not only on the bodies of women, but to women themselves. This reinforces this work's belief that silence is something that is more often than not forced onto women as both objects of male ideologies and rape victims. Just to clarify, the author is not saying that women break God's rules, and so she deserves to be raped, not at all. Nor does it mean that all men will rape or objectify women just because the Bible reinforces this mentality. The cause is how women's way of aligning with God's rules through rites of passage and fertility-based rituals was suppressed by way of magnifying the importance of biological birth, marriage, and sexual relations as opposed to spiritual rebirth for both men and women. Rape seeped into people's mentality as something that can happen, and men mostly do to women, hence creating existential crisis for both men and women, as it takes us all away from our truth. Rape has created a fear in women's life that it may happen, and this is not okay. Religion should work towards changing this reality by explaining that these are metaphors for what we should not be doing. We should not be using these rape metaphors as reality. Rape should never have been part of our reality or our mentality ever. Religion should work towards changing this reality by explaining that these are just metaphors. And that both men and women should realign ourselves with God's rules. The mentality of rape should not exist. It should never have been part of our reality in the first place ever. I hope this was somewhat insightful, and if you do have any questions, reach out to theologyofher@gmail.com. Thank you for listening once more. I hope you join me again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that affirmed you as a woman, as equal to man, and made in the image of God. Heretica, her eco-feminist theology.